Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining this River Forest School District 90 Candidate Forum from the League of Women Voters of Oak Park and River Forest and the River Forest Library. Peggy, thank you so much for kicking us off here.
Well, thank you, Megan. We really appreciate our partnership with the library and helping us with your technical expertise to get this done. Good evening and welcome to the River Forest District 90 Candidate Forum. There are 4 open seats for the board. My name is Peggy Kell. I'm the Voter Service Chair for the League of Women Voters of Oak Park and River Forest. The league just celebrated its 101st birthday, and our local league is about 97 years old. Our mission is to educate community members on local, state, and national issues so that they can be more informed voters. Early voting will start March 10th at courthouses and March 22nd at Oak Park Village Hall. Election day is April 6th. The next River Forest Forum will be this Saturday, March 6th, and it will be for the village president and the village trustees. You can still register for that forum on the River Forest Library website. Leslie Lauderdale will be doing our timer box tonight, one of our members, and I'm just going to briefly go over the ground rules. Candidates will be giving a 1-minute opening statement, which will be followed by questions where they will have 1 minute to answer them. Order of speaking will alternate, and statements and questions will be timed. I, as moderator, will read the questions that were prepared in advance, and also if we have time to take some from chat. I'll make sure questions are appropriate and avoid duplication. Again, you can still submit questions to the chat box. Candidates, are you ready? Do you have any questions? All right, so we are going to start off with Katie. You're going to start your opening statement first.
Great. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and the River Forest Library, and to all of you in attendance tonight. My name is Katie Avalos, and I am running for re-election because I remain excited about the direction of our schools as we prepare our kids for their future and help foster a love of learning. I'm the mother of 3 children with very different academic needs. I have one who receives special education services, one who would be described as a high achiever, and one who's a hands-on learner. This allows me to understand a broad range of experiences in our district. Over the past 2 years, as a board member, I have made decisions across a wide range of issues. Asking questions, considering multiple perspectives, seeking solutions, and at times making difficult choices. My voice and experience remain valuable and needed as we continue to maneuver through the pandemic and address the impact on our kids in terms of their mental health and academic needs. We are at a point in time where we face many challenges, but tremendous opportunities as well. I hope to earn your vote so I can continue to work towards our mission to inspire and empower all learners to achieve their personal best. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Hello, everyone. I am Sarah Eckman. I was born and raised in River Forest. I went to Willard and Roosevelt schools. And once my husband and I started having a family, I knew I wanted to return for the community and also the amazing education. So I have identical twin boys. They are in 1st grade at Willard. And I also have a 3-year-old who will be joining the pre-kindergarten in the fall. And so professionally, I am a nurse practitioner, but I also have a degree in psychology. I specialize in outpatient psychiatry, neurology, and ortho. I've also done a lot of research in my time. I used to call Rush home, but I've also worked at Northwestern University. I've moonlighted in the RIC and the spinal cord injury unit, and have been adjunct faculty for undergraduate nursing students. So the reason I'm running is because we've just been through a lot this year, and the board will have a lot on its plate. I am a candidate that will listen to the needs of the community. I'm not focused on one sole purpose, and I will have a focus on empathy and equity. So thank you. My time is up.
All right, thank you. Scott?
Great, thanks. Thanks for hosting. Yes, Scott Hall, parent of 2 elementary students at Willard, a 1st and 3rd grader. Professionally, I work for Jefferies, an investment bank, and bring 20+ years of investment and finance and banking experience. I've always, since we've been here, I've been very just watchful and interested in our schools and our grade system and kind of learning about things that have come up from time to time, but really got heavily involved over the last year as the pandemic came on, was a member of the remote learning action team over the summer, and really felt motivated to run on a number of issues. I've been a staunch and loud supporter of the kids being in school from the fall. And the other things that I think you'll hear from me and that I want to talk about are academic excellence and getting us back on trend, our fiscal situation, which is in a deficit, as well as equity and inclusion, but really making some changes that will close the achievement gap. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole?
Hi, thank you, Peggy, and thank everyone for joining us tonight, and just for the League of Women Voters and for the library to, host us. So my name is Nicole Thompson. I've been in the district since 2008. I have 4 children that have gone through the school. 2 of my children now are sophomores and seniors in high school, and I have 2 that are at Roosevelt Middle School that are in 6th and 8th grade. Personally, as a child, I always loved, learning and being in school. My kids, I'm thankful that they, kind of learned that, and that kind of was fostered with them being in District 90. And so I joined the board because I was interested in continuing, continuing supporting our schools, continuing all the wonderful things that I experienced in our district. So I want other kids to feel that same and have that same experience. Professionally, I'm an academic physician. I'm a medical educator. I'm a mentor and advisor for medical students and residents. And I work, collaboratively with members of the board. I try to be consistent and compassionate in my service. And I just want to continue the work that we're doing, especially to just recover during this time over this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy?
Hello, good evening. Thank you again to Peggy and to the library for hosting this, and thanks to everyone for making time to come. I'm Stacy Williams. I've been in River Forest since 2006, originally from Philadelphia. But I have 2 kids who are now in high school who both went through District 90. They both attended Lincoln and Roosevelt. And through that time, I had the opportunity to work in the district in a number of ways, from in their classrooms, center time, reading with them. I've worked on the Inclusiveness Advisory Board, Strategic Planning Committee, as well as the Equity Committee. And then I have served on the school board proudly for the last 5 years. And I decided to run again. And admittedly, it was a very tough decision. It's been a long, tough year, but I think through that process, I learned the value of experience and steadiness through this process. And I think our district is in good hands. I'm hopeful for the future of our district, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work in partnership with our leadership.
Thank you. All right, the first question, we'll start with Sarah. What changes do you see will be permanent to the classrooms of the future? And how will you adjust the budget to fulfill these changes?
That's a great question. I feel like the past year, obviously, we've had to adapt to a lot of new things. And we have increased our ability to reach outside of the physical classroom. So with the electronics and all the, ways to reach out, it's already happening. We're learning more and more every day. Our educators have already had to learn this past year. So I think just continuing with that, students who are maybe sick could now learn at home instead of having absences. And it's really already been worked into the budget. So I don't see that as some huge obstacle that we would have to get over. So I think it's just already been a positive thing that we have unfortunately been through. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I think the forced technological adoption of the pandemic, I think over time and in the future will be a net good for the district and for kids all over the country. I think in particular, one of the areas that I've already seen or heard examples of that is even for certain students, whether they have disabilities or different modes of learning, we've already been able to leverage some of this technology to give them a better or sort of a more comprehensive experience. So I think, and encourage that to continue. I do think there's a cautionary piece to this, right? In that we don't want remote to ever become a suitable standard for in-person learning, because even in its best form, it's not. So I think as a tool and a supplement, it's a powerful tool. You know, budget-wise, again, I think we've been forced to digest a lot. One of the things that I want to do is kind of look through at all the technology spend we've made, and when we sort of emerge, say, all right, this was a home run, keep that, but what are the 2 or other things we tried that maybe we don't need to keep?
Thank you. Nicole?
Yes, I do want to echo the technological advances that we've made. And, you know, we were really well positioned to do so because of the iPad distribution that we had in D90. So we put us in a nice place. I think also us kind of delving into the block scheduling, allowing our kids to have a more deeper, you know, critical, you know, evaluation of the topics. And so that alone, I think, is actually another pearl that could continue to go. And really, when we're trying to create global citizens, we really want our children to think critically. We're not really learning the way we learned, where a lot of things were more surface learning and we're trying to memorize everything. So I think that's going to propel us into the future and really going to, you know, grab, you know, our kids and kind of really, you know, just immerse them into this wonderful and rich environment of learning, and just let them have time to you know, kind of give more voice and choice on the things they want and how we can deliver this content to them in a way that's more accessible to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy?
So there's no need to repeat what's been said about technology. I think it's kind of obvious that that's where our kids are going. And similar to what Nicole said, our district was well positioned to prepare our kids for what's coming with technology. But I think we did learn that there are some creative ways we can use technology. You know, I think Scott said that there's been sort of like a net positive about technology coming through the pandemic, but it is not the answer, but it does present some creative opportunities going forward. But I will add that some of the investments we've made in curriculum are because of the desire for kids to have more agency and independence in their learning, right? It's not about memorizing formulas and memorizing math facts. It's about understanding how numbers work, why math is important for the world, how math is applied, and what you might decide to do with the rest of your life. So that's the way our kids are learning, and that does require some investment in professional development and learning for our kids.
Thank you. Katie?
One of the things that I don't think has been mentioned yet is, out of this pandemic, I do think there will be a change in terms of how we prioritize social emotional learning. It was needed before, but now more than ever. And in the past, it's really been more segmented in the school day or the school week. And I'm hoping that as we kind of recover from this, that it becomes something that's more interwoven into every part of our kids' day. I do think the technology piece is critical in terms of what it means from facing outward from the classroom. Can we be collaborating across districts with different, you know, kids at Willard and Lincoln getting together, you know, things happening beyond our district, and what that opens the world for our kids. But of course, the balance. You know, our teachers played a critical role this last year in innovating and adapting. And for me, they will always be the most important part of what helps our district move forward, along with obviously progressive curriculum and professional development.
Thank you. Scott, you're going to start this next question. Discuss the current state of D90's finances and any changes you'd make to improve the financial health of our district during the next 4 years.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is an area where I really hope to bring, you know, my professional and academic background. Everybody knows, you know, we are flush with resources in the general sense, and that's true, and that's not going away. But we are effectively running a $2 million operating deficit, above and beyond, you know, just some special capital expenditures, quite a bit that have been done over the last 6 years or so. And so we find ourselves in a situation where, you know, even if you look at the 5-year projection, even, bringing in or reissuing another $9.5 million in debt in 23, the following year, we fall into a $3 million deficit again. So that is not sustainable. And the businessman in me says, okay, maybe we had some heavy spend. How do we inflect and climb out of that? But when I look at the numbers and I talk to Anthony Causey, there's no inflection. And so we really are going to have to look for opportunities to cut costs and other revenue sources to really get us back on a curve where we're not running an annual deficit.
Thank you. Nicole?
Yes, so being on a board, I've noticed that, we've had great, stewardship with the finances. Anthony Causey has done a wonderful job in doing so, and our AAA rating kind of speaks to that. I would say that the board has known that we were going to be going into deficit spending because our expenses, 80% of our expenses are salaries and benefits. Most of our revenue comes in from the tax base and from our local tax base, which I'm sure everyone knows. So, with that, we have work to do things like grants, to the bond sales, and either other, avenues. And the main, the main thing that's going to continue to keep us afloat is our bond sales, and that was mentioned earlier. And honestly, looking at that, if you project out past the current projections, really that would get us to around 2028, 2029. So not that we don't, look at things now and figure out ways to cut, but we do have time to do it. We've already started doing it. So it's not something that we have missed or didn't know about. So I think there's always ways to look at and save more money. And so that's what we've been doing. And I think the evidence is just in the rating and what you can see, online on the district website.
Thank you. Stacey?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And Scott and Nicole both said the district's finances are very healthy. We do have healthy cash reserves. We are in deficit spending, which we knew, but part of that is because our budget is managed extremely conservatively. It's already been factored into the budget that a portion of our pension spend, which the state covers, may fall into the district's hands. It hasn't happened yet, but our budget accounts for that. We have an extremely conservative director of finance who, every time he comes before the board, reminds us all of the factors that go into planning our budget. And for the record, issuing a bond is not a bad thing. It is responsible financial management once every decade or so, every 9 years or so, to issue a bond, because what that does for you is it keeps your credit healthy. It's like having a credit card. You tell your kids to have a credit card so you can show that you can pay your debts and pay your bills. It allows your credit rating to be high. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we have conservative financial management, which I think is essential for this district.
Thank you. Katie?
I think it's important to note that the last referendum in District 90 was in 2006. And in many other communities, there's been one or two since then. And this is due to our fiscal management and long-term planning and the use of bond sales, which, as Stacey mentioned, is a good choice to make and a typical mechanism used in school financing. We did know that we would be in deficit spending, and that isn't sustainable. Scott is right about that, but as Nicole said, we have time, and we run a very lean budget. Anthony Causey doesn't even have a webcam on his computer, which is why no one sees him at our meetings. He's not a spendy guy. It is important that we also are looking for revenue sources. And I think the partnership with the village is where we can have some inroads with that in terms of new tax revenues, new commercial builds, stuff that might happen with the TIF district on North Avenue and Madison. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
And just to kind of wrap everything up with everything everybody else has said, we are a well-funded district. We, are financially healthy, even though there's been some expenses this year, the air conditioner, these things were needed for the health of our educators, for the health of our students. So I think even though it looks not great on paper, it was a necessary spend. And so certain things we have to do, we have to invest in our district. So we are not currently in a deficit. I don't think that it's, it's just a shock value saying those things. So right now we're just in a good, we can do programs that are revenue neutral. We can try to definitely trim down certain programs. Our teachers can teach each other different educational programs, but everything that we spend, I think, is very necessary, and that shows in the district.
Thank you. Nicole, you'll start this next question, and it is a little complicated, so let me go through it, and if you want me to repeat it, just ask. How would you investigate the causes behind the decline in some schools' ratings and average test scores for 3rd to 8th graders, and the decline in average test scores for 3rd to 8th graders in math and language arts? The question is, how would you investigate the causes behind the decline?
So first, I guess I would like to say that I guess it depends on what they're looking at. So I know people have been looking at the scores from 2017 to 18 to 2019 to 2020, or maybe I have those, I may have dates, 2017 to 18 and 2018 to 2019. So there are a lot of things that we did look at for those scores. Some of those we know that they looked at proficiency versus growth when they looked at the scores over those 2 different years. And so when you went from one set of years to the next, there actually was a decrease in the category that we were in for that specific test. But when you look at proficiency versus growth, the growth they were looking at were in our subgroups. So what that test revealed was that in our subgroups, we're not having the same amount of growth that we're having in other groups in our district. So that speaks more to equity. And that speaks to more equity, that we need to do more into level the playing field, give resources to students that need it the way they need it, so that we can actually increase that. So if we want to increase that change that we saw, we need to do more in equity to affect change there.
Thank you. Stacey?
Well, I think it's fair to say that those causes are being investigated. It's not like no one in the district is looking into it. We have a pretty proactive and engaged superintendent and director of curriculum who are, and we have hired a data specialist to help us kind of dig in and figure out exactly what is happening with our test scores. Part of the problem, to Nicole's point, is the IAR assessment from the state has been problematic. So it makes it difficult to look at scores year to year, which is why we do look at growth. The MAP test is one of the most reliable tests that the district uses to help us determine if our students are growing, right? It's one thing to say this is the raw score they got on a test, but are they growing from year to year? And when you break that down into subgroups, you see some groups are growing more than others. So we are absolutely on top of figuring out what's behind achievement issue that you raised.
Thank you. Katie?
Yes, thank you. So there's a little bit of an issue here with the idea that our test scores are drastically falling. If we look at our MAP scores, which is more valuable to us because it has not changed over the years as the state testing, our kids are generally doing well, both in terms of achievement in the high 90s for reading, in the low 90s for math, but also in terms of growth. As it relates to the state testing, as Nicole said, it's really about the subsets. And that is a big part of why our rating went from exemplary to commendable, was because those individual groups were not making progress. So it's actually a call to redouble our efforts on equity and figure out what more we need to do. After that test results came out, there were building level plans that were put in place to help students. And the pandemic has derailed that, but my understanding is that will come back. But as Stacey said, this is something that we've been looking at really closely and been working on all along. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. How would you investigate the causes behind the decline in some schools' ratings and the decline in average test scores for third 3rd through 8th graders in math and language arts? How would
Okay.
you investigate the causes behind the decline?
So to build on what everybody else has been saying, I think there is kind of a misunderstanding too that our test scores are dramatically tanking and we're all going to have to move because our property values are going to go down. That's just not accurate or correct. Comparing certain years to other years is apples to oranges. It's not that we don't understand it. They're just evaluating different things. So, we have always really done well and scored really well. Even during the pandemic, I think they last evaluated in November. We were still showing growth, which is commendable in considering the circumstances. So I think what we do need to look at and pay attention to is, the gap. And we are researching different ways, and it's doubling down on equity, as everybody's kind of said. We need to make sure we're getting to all the students and figuring out ways to help them all achieve and all thrive.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, so I would echo a few things, but I would also sort of clarify a few things. Definitely one of the leading things we need to work on is we're seeing these issues in subgroups around growth rates, and that definitely merits, I think Katie used the word, a redoubling of our efforts around equity. Absolutely. MAP is a great test. It is everything that everyone said it is. But when you really step back, when we talk about declines in growth rates, for example, Stanford embarked on a massive data study over the last 2 years or so, and they look at a district level trend in growth rates of standardized test scores. Our growth rates simply at an aggregate level, not subgroups, et cetera, our growth rates kind of bounced off the ceiling around 2016, 2017, and they're not catastrophically falling, but they are falling at a negative clip, okay? And so when we talk about MAP versus say IAR, like any of these tests it's flawed, they're all flawed. But IAR is the test that everybody in the state takes. So we have the ability to benchmark ourselves and our students against everyone else. You don't always have that ability when you're doing sort of your own tests around things like MAP, and that's really important.
Thank you. Stacey, you'll start this next question. We're going to build on what a lot of you mentioned on equity. So what is your read on progress in equity and inclusion efforts? At this point, what do you see as the short and long-term goals, and how should these changes be evaluated?
Hard to answer that in a minute. The district has actually been extremely committed to equity, and I commend our superintendent and his leadership. And I've had the privilege of working closely with him. So we've done a lot. We had 3 clear goals for the board coming out of our early work in equity around professional development, hiring, and then our curriculum. So those are, forever embedded in the way that we work. Long term for me, equity has to not be looked at as an initiative. That's something we check the box and do and move on and do something else. But it's built into the culture of how we operate. And when we look at all the children that walk into our building, we have to fundamentally believe that each and every one of them has the ability to be successful and to be high achievers. And that requires a lot of culture change in our staff and teachers and also in our parent community. Equity is severely misunderstood, and I think we have to help change that culture.
Thank you. Katie?
Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. What is your read on progress in equity and inclusion efforts? At this point, what do you see as the short and long-term goals, and how should changes be evaluated?
So I think that we have done some things that put us on the right track in terms of adopting a rigorous curricula that also allow for multiple entry points, implicit bias training, changing some of our hiring practices, making sure that our libraries are reflective of our diverse student body. But as Stacey said, equity isn't a checkbox. Equity and inclusion work is something that we live every day. And equity is about meeting each child where they are and helping them achieve their personal best. For the short term, we would look to see decreases in achievement and opportunity gaps. For the long term, we would look to foster more student voice and choice and kids feeling like they belong and like they have agency. I am done with this question, so I just want to make one quick point that MAP testing is normed nationally, so it's not something that we're just doing here in River Forest. And so those numbers of where we are is based off of nationally, so more than Illinois.
Thank you. Sarah?
Okay, so with equity, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. What is your read on progress in equity and inclusion efforts? At this point, what do you see as the short and long-term goals? How should changes be evaluated?
So equity is a constant thing that needs to be worked on. It can always be improved. With our students, I feel like there's some, well, in parents, there's a misconception that the equity initiative started 4 years ago is somehow taking from the top tier students and given to the students with different learning needs. And that's just a false assumption. It's not true at all. The equity initiative makes sure that we are reaching all of our students and giving every student what they need to thrive. So students need different things, different resources. And so we're not taking from just the top learners, we're making sure everybody can succeed at their highest level. As far as like IEPs and 504s, we're pushing into the classrooms more. I think with IEPs and parents, we don't have enough transparency, and there's not necessarily, people coming into the district don't always know what's available to them. So I think more communication is always a goal. And that time is up. It's a quick minute.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I can speak a little bit just to my experience as a parent that came in here with basically pre-K kids. And then my youngest was able to be part of the inclusion preschool program. I think this body and knowing some of these people a little bit personally deserves a ton of credit for the progress we've made. I feel it and see it, and it's changed in the time that I've been here and my kids are progressing through school. You know, short term, long term, I don't know that they're necessarily short versus long, but definitely short term, as we've talked about, we know we're missing some subsets, and we know despite really good efforts, we have an achievement gap issue that isn't quite resolving, I think, the way we want. So that's the short term. You know, I'd like to say it's short term, it's become kind of long term, but all the research and people I've talked to, we need to have full day kindergarten, and I would argue that we need to have more early education. If not, that means the full day preschool or broadening the inclusion preschool. You cannot close the achievement gap and help these subgroups without more investment in early education.
Thank you. Nicole?
So the equity work really started before I came onto the board, and one of my children was able to participate and kind of just give some of her experiences to the different committees and talk about things that she, saw in the district. So, from that experience and, getting more information from her about what she, heard other students saying, I feel like we've come a long way from where we were. But as, many people mentioned before, we have, more ways to go. I think in the short term, addressing the growth gap that we talked about earlier for the students that are in the different subgroups. But I think on a long term is just having some more of those conversations where students that are feeling that they're in situations that, that shouldn't exist. There are, obviously ways that we can address it. But I think one way we really should address is with opening it up in the more, giving children an avenue so they can actually talk about these and talk about how it's making them feel. And I know we have the, advisories and things like that, but opening it up and having more real, deeper conversations. And I think that would go a long way in helping to eliminate some of the things that we're seeing in the district.
Thank you. Katie, you'll start this next question off first. Give examples of how non-parent community members can have a voice in the operation and vision for D90.
Well, we have a variety of committees that non-parent community members participate in, including this most recent last year. Nicole and I both sat on the strategic planning process. And there were a number of stakeholders who are not parents in District 90, representatives from the Park District, from the community center, from the YMCA, also the assistant superintendent from OPRF was there. I currently serve on the Inclusion Advisory Board, and we have a number of non-parent participants as well. Some teachers who do and don't live in the district, but also just community residents who don't even have children, but who feel strongly about our schools. You know, there's always opportunity to send an email and give public comment, and we continue to look for ways on our committees to make sure that we have a cross-section of people involved in the process. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Sarah. Sarah,
So I think the pandemic obviously helped accelerate everybody's comfortability and level of comfort with, you know, Zoom and reaching out to people, because you can't just show up to a building and listen. So I think that has really moved us along in being able to communicate with community members that don't necessarily go to school with their children every day and interact with teachers. So I think that's one way. Another way would be surveys through the mail, send an email. There's always ways to try to reach out and be more involved, asking opinions, asking for ideas. People can give feedback, but if they do give feedback, they should be listened to. I think sometimes just goes into the air and no one gets listened to. So I think having that interaction would encourage more residents who aren't parents in the district to be more involved and have a voice.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, you know, I would love to see us try to get more of, you know, our seniors, and even I think it's a well-known stat, right? But 73%, 70% of River Forest residents don't have a kid in D90, either because they've aged out or they're using private schools or whatever. That's a really compelling number. It's a benevolent number because it's a heavy tax base. So I'm a big fan of surveys, but I also say, you know, I think there's a couple hundred people on this call. Like, surveys, you don't look at a survey and say, okay, well, 80% said this, we'll do that. Hopefully you elect us and we kind of do a good job of that. But I do think more surveying and real transparent surveying, and that can mean a couple different things, would be really important. The other piece I think where there's a big opportunity, and I've talked to trustees about this, is, I mean, we're so small, we should be leveraging the village and the village communications more. They just simply have a broader audience. And again, whether that's email, whatever, the reality is there's thousands of people looking at that, whereas we are just who is in D90. So I'd love to partner with them more.
Thank you. Nicole?
Peggy, would you mind repeating the question, please?
Absolutely. Give examples of how non-parent community members can have a voice in the operation and vision for D90.
Yeah. So I think, you know, I would echo, you know, many of the things that people said before, but I do think that just as a district, we are open to community members. Some of our schools actually put on different activities for community members to come and join. And so participating in any, now during COVID, obviously we don't have those, but participating in any activity that we have, or town hall types of meetings, or now, you know, we have Zoom that's always open to our whole community to talk to. People already mentioned surveys. And I just think that in general, we try to, you know, provide an opportunity for our district and our community at large to communicate either, you know, directly with us. I think we're all really open and willing to, you know, take the time and have those conversations. And then also, you know, we know that the administration, Ekman, and his support staff, they're all there to answer questions, respond to emails. And I think that maybe just, you know, having people take one of the routes that they're most comfortable with would be the best way to do that.
Thank you. Stacy?
So of course, going last now, I'll just sound redundant. But I mean, Katie outlined a number of ways that our superintendent reaches out to the community at large. You know, Scott mentioned the 70%. When I learned that number a couple of years ago, I was astounded that so many of our property tax dollars come from households without students in our district. But I do think that there are a number of opportunities, and I've sat on a lot of committees with residents who don't have kids in the district. And by the way, we have 2 board members, I'm one of them, who no longer have kids in the district, and we welcome that participation in the school board. So I think the outreach is there. Could we do better? Yes, I do think we could do better. I think reaching out to our senior community is probably something that we could be a little more laser focused about. I think that's a rich community that we could tap into. And Scott mentioned partnership with the village. We have a board member who sits on a collaboration committee specifically with the village so we can figure out how to do more in partnership. So it's happening.
Thank you. Sarah, you're going to start this next question. Do you think time has been lost because of COVID? And if so, how is the district going to help kids make up the time lost to the pandemic?
Well, yes, I mean, we've lost time. Unfortunately, the whole world has lost a year, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be extremely detrimental to our students. We have a lot of resources that we can pull and address those needs. And it's going to be a lot of assessing, reassessing, and reassessing down the line. This was a year of lost learning. And so it's going to be a couple years to make it up. Obviously, we have great teachers that we're pivoting this year to keep going with the Zoom and the lessons, so it was, a really tough year, but I think we have the resources more so than other districts. And we just need to keep assessing and reassessing to see where we can make that up. Summers, it's really hard to say at this point because it's not over yet, but it will end, and then we'll have to kind of pick up the pieces then.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I like the word Sarah used, assessing. I mean, I think we're going to have to, and I mean that even in the loosest term versus the prior topic, just drilling in and seeing where kids are at as individuals, right, and in the collective. And so then I think there's going to have to be an enormous amount of creativity that your typical board and administration probably isn't accustomed to in a public school environment. Maybe that means, and there's state requirements around this, but maybe it means we have to focus on math and reading and science, and there has to be a morning math and a half math in the afternoon. That's literally an idea just thought up on the fly, and I don't know if that's totally viable. But it's going to take that. There's going to have to be a focus because you can't make up for the net lost time. It's impossible unless we go to school 2 years in a row all year, for the next couple of years. So I think we're going to have to be very targeted. We're going to have to decide what hours we want to make up and then get creative on how we're going to do it.
Thank you. Nicole?
Yeah, so, I agree. There's no way to make up time just because, again, we're all experiencing this across the world. But what I do know is that our teachers, our administrators, they were very strategic about picking the standards they thought were most important for our students to cover. And so that's what they did. And I think that shows in the MAP scores we were talking about earlier, because we have not seen a loss. Our students have actually grown during a pandemic. So I think by them focusing earlier on what the things that were most important, that put us in a great position. So now we can go back to the things that that were still there for us to cover, and going forward, we know where we need to start when we're in more time, next year and later in this year, when we have more time, we can fill in those spaces. But I think we've done a great job, with the time that we've had. But I would just say that we're all in this together. The whole world is experiencing the same thing. And I think we just, we were ahead of the game, I think.
Thank you. Stacy?
Yeah, to actually piggyback on what Nicole said, in terms of how teachers are handling it right now and prioritizing what to cover. The good news is we're not waiting to get through the pandemic to figure out what we do about it. It's happening right now. Some of you may have been a part of recent board meetings where our superintendent presented his plan, which is called Thriving in District 90. And that plan is made up of a number of, well, it will be made up of some academic and social emotional learning supports for the students. He's putting together a team made up of a number of experts, including teachers. It includes parents. Students are a part of that, so their voice is heard. We are bringing in mental health experts, social workers, with the idea that we need to come up with a plan to make sure we are supporting our children in the areas of academics and social emotional learning as we go forward. And it's starting now, it's already happening. We also have a partnership with the West Cook YMCA. It's called Power Scholars Academy that will be happening, housed in District 90 this summer, to help mitigate some of the learning loss we know is happening, and summer school.
Thank you. Katie?
Sure. I think the first part is the assessments to determine who lost what, and that has already been happening, as both Nicole and Stacey have mentioned. We're utilizing our existing multi-tier levels of support to figure out who needs additional support, expanding summer school, working with first graders specifically who need additional reading support. Kids with IEPs, I've talked to Denise Matthews about how each IEP is being looked at to see what might have been missing over the last year and how do we make that up going forward. To me, the biggest piece of this is actually the social emotional learning. If we do not address that first, then our kids cannot be in a place to make any academic gains. It is something that they go hand in hand. And I would like to focus on that at the same time as we're working on the academics, which, as Stacey mentioned, our district has already been looking at.
Thank you. Scott, you're going to get the next question first. How would you support the teachers of District 90?
Well, I think one of the things that we can do better at, because I think over the years there's been an increasing amount of support for teachers in the training and implementation we've done over the last few years specifically. I think one of the things we can do to support them better is to listen to them more. And this gets back to the power of surveying. I think, the 5 essential survey that parents, students, and teachers all do is a really, really powerful tool. And it, again, like any survey or any sort of test, it's got its inherent flaws. But I think when you really look at some of what the teachers are telling us, what they told us pre-pandemic, and now we're all doing this now, all these parties, it'll be interesting to see how that changes. But I think there's a lot of signals that come through that. And I think being open to saying, okay, we're hearing that there's a leadership concern, or we're hearing that they're not getting the training that we even thought they did. Just accepting that and really hearing them, and then trying to figure out what we need to do better. I think that's what I hear from a lot of teachers.
Thank you. Nicole?
I think to echo a little bit what Katie was saying earlier, I think, we realize what our kids are going through and what we're going through, and our teachers, in addition to going through this pandemic, they're actually, learning how to teach, remotely. They're learning how to teach remotely and hybrid. They're still dealing with the trauma of this whole pandemic with whatever's going on in their family. So I think first we have to support them in that way, to realize that, each person may have, something different that they're struggling with, and to be, open and understanding and compassionate about that, and to support them in those ways. And then, additionally, just, professional development was mentioned. I think that, as we move forward, especially with different initiatives to try to, push forward the strategic plan, to provide those professional development opportunities for the teachers, and to actually get feedback from them to see, if that kind of, gave them the information, the tool sets that they needed, and if not, ways to go about actually providing those services.
Thank you. Stacey?
Yeah, I agree actually with what Scott and Nicole both said. We talk a lot about how our students are experiencing trauma right now. Obviously, our teachers are as well. We ask a lot of them when we ask them to go back into the classroom. And I think the district has done everything that it can to make sure that they are a part of the process to figure out how to do it safely, making sure that their voice is a part of the process, making sure that their voices are heard. And when we get through to the other side of this, how can we make sure that they are nurtured and supported as we bring all of us back to some state of normal, whatever that might look like. Obviously the district invests a lot in our teachers through professional development, and all along the way, teachers are asked, how is it going? How can it be better? What can we do to make this better? Every time we consider a curriculum change, we put together teams that involve the teachers. They are a part of helping us decide what is the best approach to take for this specific thing that we're deciding. Not only is their voice heard, but they get to pilot, they get to assess it, they get to have some say in what goes forward. So just continuing that process, I think, is critical.
Thank you. Katie?
I think a big piece of it is respecting them as professionals. And I think in general, our district does a good job in that. As Stacy was saying, our teachers play a critical role in selecting our curriculum, piloting it, helping us decide what direction we want to go in. They also are involved in a number of committees, the Strategic Planning Committee, the IAB, all the planning committees that were involved with the pandemic, the remote learning, and I'm currently on the Social Emotional Advisory panel, I think it is, and there's teachers involved in that as well. It is, helping them be their best, and that is through certainly professional development, which they also have voice in, and give feedback afterwards. Certainly surveys, but a lot of times it's also making sure that they have a voice at the table in some of the decision making. And as both Stacy and Nicole said, certainly supporting them, their own mental health going forward as we transition back to normalcy. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Well, that's a great question. There is a lot of ways that we can support our teachers. Obviously, they are the best in Illinois. But I think a lot of it is what the community does. We can stop bashing them online, on social media. They see things that parents post and they are people, this hurts them. And then they have to go into the classroom during a pandemic and teach our children. So I think that's the first step, is respecting them and not taking all of our frustration from the virus and the pandemic out on our educators. So that's probably one of the first things. Investing in the professional development, I think we should also be investing in obtaining and retaining our talent, our teachers. They only make 2% more than the average Illinois teacher. So 2% for such a wealthy district, we should really be offering a competitive package to our educators. And so I feel like that could be improved tremendously. So the teachers, they make the district, they make D90, they make our district. We can treat them really well. We should be treating them well. They make the community strong. All right, that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, you don't have to stop your thought in mid-sentence. You can finish your sentences. Okay, Nicole, I think this will be the last question before closing statements. As a board member, how can you facilitate the narrowing of the achievement gap? How can you facilitate the narrowing of the achievement gap?
So, so as a board, we set policy and we, work to, hire a superintendent and make sure that he is, being held accountable for the metrics that we set as a district. And so recently we set our strategic plan, and through that we talked about equity being one important piece of that plan. We talked earlier about the gap in growth that we see in the subgroups being, strongly tied to equity. So as a board member, my job is to, maintain the expectation that we're going to close that gap. We're going to, ask questions of the administrators, expect results, measurable results that we're going to be updated on a regular basis, and that we're going to, follow up with him to see what ways we're going to address it, and if those ways aren't working, then we're going to follow up again and say, well, what else can we do? Be supportive in any way that we can, and continue to push the issue that without us seeing consistent change or consistent improvement, then we won't make our goal. And so I think previously in our last strategic plan, we actually had our measured goals, and we're planning to do the same.
Thank you. Stacy?
Nicole said that very eloquently, articulating what our role is as the board. We have to hold our superintendent and his team accountable to the goals that we set out. Our equity committee, I mentioned earlier, our 3 goals were around professional development, curriculum, and hiring. It's part of the process. Narrowing gaps is complicated and it's long-term. We can't expect that, hey, guess what, in 3 years we will no longer have a gap. That's not the case. So it requires patience and it requires an understanding that doing this kind of work, it takes a very long time, because professional development only works if it happens. If biases, unconscious and conscious biases that affect a student's achievement in ways that are hard to really measure, those things happen over time. So it's a long process, and it's something that we have to be in for the long haul. So we have to be patient. It's not just this board, but it's the next board and it's the next board.
Thank you. Katie?
Will you repeat the question, Peggy?
Absolutely. As a board member, how can you facilitate the narrowing of the achievement gap?
So again, like Stacy and Nicole says, it really goes to what our role is, which is big picture vision, holding our superintendent accountable towards working towards the goals that are in our strategic plan. And there's some, significant work that still needs to be done. But we have made some progress. I do think that, in addition to working the strategic plan, we need to take a hard look at the achievement gap that we actually had for kids with IEPs, which is larger than state average. And there's a lot of reasons why that is, but that's an area where I think we can really do better. And I also think it's important to consider expanding the preschool program, which my son actually participated in the program in Oak Park, a similar program, to include other risk factors that impact long-term academic success and not just focused on kids with IEPs. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
So yes, obviously to build on everybody else's statements, it goes back to equity and making sure that we're really meeting the needs of every single student. People do move here because we have strong services for IEPs, different learning needs, and we can build on that. It's always just, figuring out what the problem is and trying to tackle it, and that's the achievement gap. And I think we're letting our educators work with the curriculum. They can adapt. We pilot different programs, and it's just really trusting the teachers to figure out what works best for each student. And it's also reaching out to families. I think board members can't specifically do that, but we can ask people what they need and what's not being addressed and what they think. And communication can always be better. So I think that's one way that it can be improved. And I think the last thing is just making sure that it's a forefront of everything that we do in the district. Equity, equity, equity.
Thank you. Scott?
The last guy and the last question, I think, so I'll just say agree. No, I think, especially the current board members, they know what's going on. They know what's being done at a level that I certainly couldn't get there without being in the room. I would just say a couple of things that I mentioned earlier. I think, and I'm the finance guy, so this is going to be expensive, but we have to do more for early education. We have to do more for inclusion preschool and preschool in general. We have to get to full day kindergarten. These are documented, top 5 things you do to effectively close your achievement gap. Things like early education and full day kindergarten, maybe not in those words, are on that list. And I think the other one, Katie was alluding to it, but even on Tuesday night's meeting, when Denise had a session and Katie was involved a lot in a Q&A, and I've worked with Denise and talked to her a little bit over the last couple of months. She's emphasized that we also, as it relates to students with IEPs and the achievement gap amongst students with disabilities, to Katie's point, it is larger than average. And I think we really need to drill down on that. And I think even in Denise's words, there's an element of rethinking the rigor around that and how we challenge and encourage these kids to succeed.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start with closing statements, and Stacey, you're going to go first.
I again want to thank you for the time to talk about these issues. It's actually nice to hear everyone's perspective and just talk about some issues that are important to the district. I think my experience on the board is valuable. I think I've learned a lot as a board member over the last 5 years and what it means to really be a part of governance and working in collaboration with other board members and with district leadership. And I feel like that will help us as we get through what I think is, I think it's going to be a challenging time. And we have to recognize that, I alone don't have the answers to figure out how this is all going to look and how we get through it. But I look forward to continuing working with my board and with the board's leadership. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Katie?
Thank you to the League of Women Voters, to the River Forest Library, to all of you attending tonight, and to my fellow candidates. I am running for re-election partly out of a sense of duty to help see our district through these difficult times, but also because I remain excited about what's going on. Our district is committed to student-centered learning that prepares our kids for their future rather than our past, encouraging students to gain key skills like critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and confidence. We want to inspire a love of learning and provide a sense of belonging. I look to lead with empathy. My goal is not to change minds, but to gain a deeper understanding to work towards consensus. I am running for re-election because I want to continue to be part of this process and believe my voice remains valuable and needed at the decision-making table. I hope you will consider re-electing me on April 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
So I am running for the board, not to be making decisions with fun lunch, but to make important decisions that actually matter. And when I got into nursing, the reason I did was because my father said to me, actually, when he was in hospice, he said, pick something that matters and pick something that helps people in what you do. And so I've always kept that with me. And so I think I have a different skill set with my nursing background that would be an asset to the board. I'm endorsed by the former president of the District 90 Board of Education. I am endorsed by the current president of the District 90 Board of Education. I am endorsed by different community leaders and activists in the community. So, and with this, our children are influenced by things that the board does now. We want them to grow up to be healthy, happy adults who then turn into leaders who influence the next generation of our youth. So these these decisions are important, and I want to be on the board. That was terrible.
You were
Reading
fine.
the last sentence,
You
it
were
would be an honor to be on the
fine.
board. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, thank you for hosting this. And wow, I mean, this was, I learned a lot again, as I have from different forums and opportunities like this. Look, my candidacy really is just about fresh perspective and just asking different questions, asking critical questions, trying to be that new voice on the board to complement and carry through some of the really good work that these board members and others have done. But I do think it's okay to ask, are there trends and test scores that do those matter? I think they matter, right? Is it okay to say we might be going off the rails a smidge on financials? I think that's okay, right? And so I just want to earn a seat at the table to learn and ask the right questions. And I will say, hopefully it shows this is, as I've learned, and I feel sorry for my peers, but this is a ton of work, this process, and hopefully that shows. I'm very passionate about our kids.
Thank you. Nicole?
So I would like to also thank you, Peggy, and the League of Women Voters for hosting us, the River Forest Library. And I agree, this is a ton of work. It's a ton of work, but I think we do it because we care about the kids. I feel like my whole life I've been caring for kids in one capacity or another, starting from babysitting when I was really young, being a pediatric anesthesiologist, taking care of my kids, and doing the work of volunteering even before I was on the board, and now being on the board. And it's all because I love kids. I love for them to grow and see them curious and able to just experience life, and to have those experiences kind of shape the way, shape how they grow and shape the direction of their life. So I think through the board work, we're making it possible so that all kids can get the resources that they need, so they can be the people that they need and reach the potentials that, that they're capable of reaching. I think it's important work. I love the work. So, please consider voting for me April 6th. I would like to continue the work and to work through this next year, this recovery year that I'm sure is going to be difficult for all of us. Thank you.
Well, thank you all candidates. You've done a marvelous job, I think. Thank you for sharing your thoughts during this forum. And we certainly thank you for stepping up to serve your community. As one of you mentioned, and all of you know, it's a lot of work. And so we thank you for stepping forward to do that. You can view the schedule, register to attend and submit questions, and view our recorded forums on the LWV OPRF website. You can also still register for Saturday's forum, village trustee and village president at the River Forest website. And also we have other forums coming up. Look at that calendar for River Forest, for the park board and for the library board. Those will be March 18th. So there's a few more coming up. This will be put on the library's website probably in a day or two. I think they'll get it up, the recording. So you can share that link once it comes available with anybody you'd like to. But I do appreciate you all participating, and as a not as a River Forester, but as a community member, I thank you for your service. So good night, and I hope everybody has a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Peggy, very much.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Peggy, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.